Alan Gross is currently being held in the prison wing of this military hospital in Havana. The Cuban authorities say that he is receiving regular medical checkups, but he's lost almost 100 pounds, 45 kilos in weight. His wife, Judy Gross, now fears that he's also losing the will to live.
His health is getting worse by the day. He's much weaker. He can't exercise anymore due to his terrible arthritis in his hips. He has trouble walking. It's very painful to watch him get up out of a chair. He's lost a couple of teeth. He's lost quite a bit of weight. And now I'm really worried because the one thing he had was his exercise, which he can't do anymore.
What's his state of mind?
Very volatile, very unpredictable, very angry, and I don't know what he's capable of at this point. I mean, for him to say he doesn't want any more visitors and he doesn't want any more packages from home, to me is just a very passive, suicidal thing almost. He's not, hanging himself, but when you give up like that, it's basically, sitting in the corner and just waiting to die.
You've had meetings with Cuban officials in Havana. What are they telling you about Alan's case?
They don't really say, they don't give us a lot of details. They agree, and now they have, well, months ago, they have communicated to the US government that they want to negotiate. That was huge. That was big news. That was more than a few months ago. Unfortunately, they never heard back from the US government.
And we are going to get this done. We are going to bring Alan home.
Last December, on the 4th anniversary of his arrest, Judy Gross led a rally outside the White House calling for President Barack Obama to personally intervene to help bring Alan home.
Alan went to Cuba on behalf of our government, and it is up to our government to secure his release.
In a letter from prison, Alan Gross said he felt abandoned by the government he was serving. So what do you think about the way the Obama administration has worked to secure Alan's release?
My answer to that is he's not home yet. I don't know how else to answer that. They're not very communicative. That's something that really angers me quite a bit. You would think that having a husband working on a U.S. project in prison for almost 5 years, you would think that they would communicate with me. And it's like pulling teeth to get any kind of communication with the people that count, with the people with the power.
I mean, the State Department says that every time they meet with Cuban officials, they raise Alan Gross's case, they call for his release.
Well, the only time they meet with Cuban officials usually is with the migration talks, and they have other things on the agenda. And I think that a lot of the discussion are these kind of, if they talk about Alan, it's on the side for 5 minutes. It's not about Alan. It's not, let's sit down and work out Alan's case. It's side talk.
Alan Gross spent years working on international development projects around the world, but the Cuba contract was different. Every year, the US Congress appropriates tens of millions of dollars to fund so-called Cuba democracy programs. Projects which the Cuban government believes are aimed at bringing about regime change on this communist-run island. Until this year, much of the funding went to USAID, the government's international development agency. It subcontracted the Cuba work to others, in Alan Gross's case, a company called Development Alternatives Incorporated. At Alan Gross's trial in Havana, which his wife Judy attended, he was convicted of acts against the Cuban state and sentenced to 15 years in jail. He'd made 5 trips to Cuba on tourist visas to deliver and install banned satellite equipment. The aim to provide the island's small Jewish community with internet access outside of the government's control.
He's done a lot of humanitarian work with all kinds of countries. So he had visited Cuba on a mission, on a religious mission, and really fell in love with the Jewish community. And there was a project available to strengthen or to develop intranet, and he jumped at it, unknowing that it was, now in hindsight we see that it was a really bad plan. He had no training, no warnings, no nothing.
He wasn't a spy. President Raul Castro has said that publicly, but a lot of people consider him to have been an unregistered foreign agent working undercover in Cuba.
I know he would not have gone had he known that he was breaking Cuban law. He thought he was there to help their 3 major communities, and he really thought that he was there to help them talk to each other more and share things.
Despite Alan Gross's arrest, these Cuba democracy programs continue. Earlier this year, another US AID project called Zunzuneo came to light, a sort of Cuban Twitter but texting on mobile phones. It started with chat about topics such as sport and music, but gradually politicized the discussions.
I think it's stupid. It's not that don't they learn? I don't get it. I just don't get it. You know, Senator Kerry, when he was head of foreign relations, did try to stop the program. He defunded it for a while, only he didn't have enough political power to keep it that way.
Of all the issues dividing the United States and Cuba, the fate of prisoners in both countries remains one of the most divisive. 3 of 5 Cubans convicted of conspiracy to commit espionage back in 2001 remain behind bars in the United States. The Cuban government has suggested a prisoner swap, but the US dismisses the idea, saying their cases are different.
That's a really difficult, delicate subject. First of all, it's not Alan wasn't a spy. These guys, the Cuban 3, were charged with spying. So the government has issues with that. And I don't know if that's what Cuba wants. I don't know if our government would give that up. Again, it's just, I'm so in the dark. But certainly a lot of people bring that up.
There was a prisoner swap just a few months ago. Sergeant Bergdahl was exchanged for Taliban prisoners, and a couple of years ago there was a Russian spy swap. How do you feel when you see these exchanges going on?
Lots of different things. I feel infuriated. I feel sad and jealous, and the Russian spies were spies. Sergeant Bergdahl, my feeling about that is what they went through to get him home with the Taliban. We don't have relations with the Taliban, but all of a sudden we're negotiating with the Taliban. So if our government can go through all of those steps, and I'm sure it was not easy to get him back, you would think they could certainly do it for Alan. So again, it's I am puzzled. And I'm smiling and I look happy, but I can tell you that inside it's a very different person.
At the end of the day, what do you think it's going to take to get Alan out of prison in Cuba and back home with you here in the United States?
At this point, more negotiations. The U.S., I guess, giving in to some of what Cuba wants, and Cuba giving into what, they want. And it needs to keep happening. They don't, sometimes in negotiations, they get to a point and they say, okay, that's it, we don't agree. This needs to happen until and we're not going to stop until he's home. We're going to continue.